The waitress who saved the CEO. The neon lights of Murphy's sports bar cast colorful shadows across the crowded room, painting everything in shades of electric blue and vibrant red. The air was thick with the sound of laughter, clinking glasses, and the steady thrum of conversation that grew louder as the night wore on. Friday nights were always busy at Murphy's, but tonight felt different, charged with an energy that made Sarah Martinez slightly nervous as she weaved between tables with her tray balanced expertly in one hand. Sarah had been working at Murphy's for 6 months now, ever since she moved to Chicago with dreams that seemed bigger than her small-town savings account could handle. The bar was her second job after her day shifts at Miller's Diner. She would change into the Murphy's uniform and work until closing, serving drinks and keeping the peace among the rowdy crowd of office workers and college students who filled the place each weekend. At 24, Sarah had learned to read people quickly. She could spot trouble brewing from across the room, knew which customers would tip well and which ones would cause problems, and had developed a sixth sense for when the friendly atmosphere was about to turn sour. Tonight, that sense was tingling. The trouble started at the high-top table near the back corner. 3 men in expensive suits had been drinking steadily for the past 2 hours, their voices growing louder with each round. They looked like they had come straight from some corporate event, eyes loosened, sleeves rolled up, the kind of confident swagger that money and alcohol combined could produce. That at the bar, a quieter man sat alone, nursing a single whiskey and checking his phone occasionally. He was dressed more casually than the others, dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt. But there was something about the way he carried himself that suggested he belonged in boardrooms rather than sports bars. His name was David Chen, though he hadn't told anyone that tonight. He had simply wanted a quiet drink after a long week of difficult decisions at work. Sarah noticed him because he was different from the usual Friday night crowd. He didn't seem interested in the games playing on the multiple screens around the bar, didn't join in the loud conversations happening at nearby tables, and he tipped well without making a show of it. There was a thoughtfulness about him that stood out in the chaos of the busy bar. That the confrontation began over something small, a spilled drink, an accidental bump, words that escalated quickly in the way that alcohol can make mountains out of molehills. Sarah was refilling the pretzel bowls when she heard voices rising above the general noise of the bar. "Watch where you're going," one of the suit-wearing men shouted, his face flushed red with anger and beer. David had simply been walking back from the restroom when he accidentally brushed against their table. He had apologized immediately, even offered to buy another round. But the 3 men seemed determined to turn the minor incident into something bigger. "You think you can just bump into us and walk away?" another one said, standing up unsteadily. "Do you know who we are?" Sarah watched from across the room as David tried to defuse the situation with calm words and raised hands. She could see that he genuinely wanted no part of whatever confrontation these men were trying to create. But they weren't giving him a choice. The bar had grown quieter, the way it always did when trouble was brewing. Other customers sensed the tension and turned to watch, some pulling out phones to record what might happen next. The bartender, Mike, was reaching for his phone to call security. But Sarah knew that help wouldn't arrive in time. That's when the first punch was thrown. Largest of the 3 men swung wildly at David, who managed to dodge but stumbled backward. Before he could recover, another man grabbed him from behind while the third prepared to land a blow that would have done serious damage. Sarah didn't think, she simply acted. She grabbed the first thing she could find, a bottle of champagne that had been sitting behind the bar for a special occasion, and rushed toward the fight, just as the man's fist was coming down toward David's face. Sarah brought the bottle down hard on his shoulder, sending a spray of champagne across the floor and causing him to stumble backward. "That's enough," she shouted, positioning herself between David and his attackers. Despite being half their size, there was something in her voice, authority born from dealing with difficult customers and managing chaos, that made them pause. "This is a bar fight, lady, not your business." One of them slurred. "Actually, it is my business," Sarah said firmly, her hands on her hips. "This is where I work, and I'm not going to let you 3 beat up someone who was just trying to apologize. Security is already on the way, and I suggest you leave before they get here." The mention of security, combined with the growing crowd of onlookers and the sobering effect of Sarah's intervention, seemed to deflate their aggression. The 3 men looked around, suddenly realizing how many people were watching and recording. Without another word, they gathered their jackets and left, muttering complaints about their ruined evening. Sarah turned to David, who was leaning against the bar, brushing champagne off his shirt and looking slightly dazed. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice gentler now. That looked like it could have gotten really bad. David looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read: surprise, gratitude, and something else that might have been admiration. "Fine, thanks to you," he said quietly. "That was incredibly brave, and probably not very safe." Sarah shrugged, suddenly feeling embarrassed by all the attention. "I've broken up plenty of fights working here. Usually they're not quite so one-sided, though." "Can I buy you a drink?" David asked, "or coffee if you prefer." "It's the least I can do. I'm still working," Sarah said, glancing around at the other customers who were slowly returning to their conversations. "But thanks, I'm just glad nobody got seriously hurt." David reached into his wallet and pulled out his business card, hesitating for a moment before handing it to her. "I'd really like to thank you properly," he said. "Maybe when you're not working." Sarah took the card without looking at it, tucking it into her apron pocket. "Sure," she said with a small smile. "I get off at midnight." It wasn't until her shift ended 3 hours later that Sarah finally pulled out the business card. In the parking lot, under the glow of a streetlight, she read the words that made her heart skip a beat. David Chen, Chief Executive Officer, Murphy's Restaurant Group. She stared at the card for a long moment, remembering the quiet man at the bar who had seemed so different from the usual crowd. Murphy's Restaurant Group owned not just this bar, but dozens of restaurants across the city, including Miller's Diner, where she worked her morning shifts. The man she had saved from a bar fight wasn't just any customer. He was the CEO of both companies she worked for, and she had no idea. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is David. I hope you don't mind. Mike gave me your number. I meant what I said about wanting to thank you. Would you have coffee with me tomorrow? I have some things I'd like to discuss." Sarah looked back at the bar, its neon lights still glowing in the darkness, then at the business card in her hand. Sometimes, she thought, the smallest acts of kindness could lead to the biggest changes. She had simply done what felt right, without knowing that her actions would connect her to someone who could change everything about her struggling situation. She typed back quickly, "I'd like that. Thank you for tonight." As she walked to her car, Sarah couldn't help but smile. Tomorrow would bring new possibilities she had never imagined.